Good morning, everybody. It's Monday, April 17th, 5:34 a.m. Central Time. July corn futures down 1.25 at 634.5. July soybeans up 8.75 at 14.76. July Chicago wheat down 3/4 of a cent at 691.75. July Kansas City wheat down 6.75 at 856.5. July spring wheat down 3.5 at 869.75. It's April 17th. What did I say the date was? And we've got some snow on the radar here this morning, and there was snow that fell over the weekend. This morning, you've got some snow moving across parts of Wisconsin, northern Illinois, Michigan, northern Indiana. The snow was over Minnesota, I believe the Dakotas, as far south as parts of maybe central Iowa. If you guys have snow totals or rain totals for me, let me know. The map on my screen here is observed precipitation over the weekend, and these maps are always kind of tricky. It's hard to tell if they're reality or not. So, I mean, the rainfall equivalent in some of these northern areas was not huge, but I know there were places in Minnesota that caught 7, 8, 9 inches of snow over the weekend. So if you guys have some totals and locations, drop them in the YouTube comments here. I'd be curious to see what you think. The forecast this week is not as good as last week. So, last week it felt like spring in a lot of areas. We were up in the 70s, 80s in some areas of the central corn belt. And that's not really going to be the case this week. We've got some more rain coming back in Wednesday or Thursday to a lot of areas. And then this coming weekend in particular, it's going to be cold again. Saturday, Sunday, into maybe Monday next week. You're talking highs across the central corn belt in the 30s. And you look at the expected highs for Sunday. That's what's on my screen here, Sunday the 23rd. You're talking highs in the 20s in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota. So I don't know if this will throw a wrench in the works of the planting plans in these areas. I know that there was a lot of progress made last week. Maybe things slow a little bit this week. If you guys have ideas on this, drop them in the comments. I'd be very curious to see what you think. But weather not nearly as good looking this week as it was last week in a lot of areas as it relates to corn and soybean planting. Guys, I had a great premium video on Friday. We did an explainer or kind of a primer on El Nino. Drew Lerner from World Weather Inc. joined me, and he did a fantastic job explaining all of this talk regarding El Nino. I think the government said last week there's a 62% chance that we see an El Nino event from during May through July, like that time period. And what exactly does that mean? Drew explained it pretty darn well. If you guys want to see the premium stuff, sign up today. You can sign up on your phone. It's a piece of cake. It takes like 1 minute with your credit card. $50 a month. Cancel it anytime. No other fee, no other obligation. Nobody will try to sell you anything else. I'll shoot you over that video here this morning. The United States may be unhappy with the UN's handling of the Black Sea grain deal. This was one of the revelations from these leaked documents that showed up here the last couple of weeks. The documents show that the Secretary General of the UN took steps to obstruct efforts to hold Moscow accountable for its actions in Ukraine. One of the documents revealed that the United States felt that the UN actions were undermining broader efforts to hold Moscow accountable for its actions in Ukraine. The UN says that this was all done to preserve the grain deal agreement. So I guess there's like two sides here. The United Nations very much wants to see the grain deal continue so that, grain is sent to these struggling countries or poorer countries. And the United States wants nothing to do with any sort of friendliness at all toward Ukraine. I don't really know what this means. We're still waiting to see whether or not Russia wants to renew this thing on May 18th. Again, they've talked tough, but they've already renewed this thing 2 different times. So it's a wait and see deal. More Ukraine grain news. The European Union will discuss Ukrainian grain imports this week. Last week, Poland and Hungary moved to ban Ukrainian grain imports. You've got this cheap Ukrainian grain flooding their local markets. It's negatively impacted local farmers in Eastern Europe. Ukraine's ag minister, of course, wants to reopen routes to Poland this week. Ukrainian grain exports via the Black Sea continue, but it's a reduced rate versus pre-war levels. They're not shipping it at the rate that they could be or would have been prior to the invasion. So the balance, or a lot of it, is being railed west to Europe. It's caused big issues. These farmers in Eastern Europe don't want this Ukrainian grain there. It's affecting their local markets negatively. So I don't know exactly how this impact the markets, but again, this is a huge shift from a year ago. A year ago, we were terrified that there was going to be a shortage, and now there's too much Ukrainian grain the way that it appears. More corn sold to China on Friday. Chinese buyers bought a mix of old crop and new crop U.S. corn, total of about 15 million bushels. So I think All in all, now they're up over 4 million metric tons, I believe is the statistic, somewhere around there in this recent buying spree. They bought another 709,000 in total through last week, kind of split between old crop and new crop. I've heard chatter that the amount could ultimately hit 5 or 6 million metric tons, depending on price. I don't know if that's going to be the deal or not, but I would not be surprised at all to see some additional Chinese corn business this week. Next thing is that we got to see the shipments. Need to see improved shipments. We did not have good corn shipments last week. We'll see what USDA has to say today. Large money managers modestly long the corn market. Net long 29,000 contracts as of last Tuesday. They were net buyers of 4,000 contracts on the week. That's the funds. So modest net long in corn. This is still a pretty big net long in soybeans, 125,000 contracts. And this is a big time net short in the SRW wheat market at 106,000. If there ever was a reason for the funds to get scared, they've got a big short position that needs to be covered or would need to be covered, but we just haven't seen anything friendly enough. And that's despite the U.S. weather issues in the southern plains. We're just, again, U.S. wheat not competitive. We've got a crush report this morning. This is the National Oilseed Processors Association. They'll be out at 11 a.m. Central Time. Ahead of this report, traders estimate that NOPA members crushed 183.4 million bushels of soybeans in March. If that's confirmed, it would represent an increase of nearly 11% versus February. Processing probably recovered in March. They had some weather issues, some maintenance in February. NOPA members, of course, handle 95% of all soybean processing in the United States. USDA projects that domestic crush will account for 51% of all demand for U.S. soybeans this year, so it's always important to pay attention to the crush reports. It's a huge chunk of the demand base. May grain options expire on Friday. If you guys have any open positions there, make sure you take a look. Cattle market kind of got beat up, at least cattle futures got beat up a little bit late last week, kind of a corrective action. Cash market's holding together okay, though. Cash in the north, or Nebraska rather, 182 to 184, I think, on Friday. Most of the southern trade last week was 174 to 177. Outside markets this morning, U.S. dollars up a little bit. The S&P's about flat. The Dow Jones up 20 points. Bonds about flat. Precious metals pretty quiet. Crude oil is down 35 cents in the June WTI, 82.06 last trade. Have a great week, guys. I'll talk to you same time tomorrow.